Hello, world, and welcome to the In My Footsteps podcast. I am Christopher Setterland, coming to you from the vacation destination known as Cape Cod, Massachusetts. It's Thanksgiving week, and I've got a little something special for you to enjoy, whether it's before, during, or after your Thanksgiving meal. It is time for mixtape number 2. For this mixtape, we're going to look back at all of the dedication to the craft photo segments on the podcast, photo trips. We've got 5 of them so far, including the interview with my buddy Steve Drozell, an actual real photographer, not a hack like me. So let's celebrate Thanksgiving week with mixtape number 2 here on the In My Footsteps podcast. So what are we going to talk about this week? It is Thanksgiving week, whether you are prepping for the meal, whether you just had the meal and you're in a food coma, or maybe it's long after Thanksgiving and you're wondering why I'm talking about it. I figured it was the perfect time for mixtape number 2. These are the periodic podcast episodes where I take a subject that I've had several segments on during the history of the podcast and I stitch them together so that it's kind of a cohesive subject, cohesive story. Mixtape number 1 I did back in July 2025. It was classic mall stores of the 70s, 80s, and 90s. This one here, like you heard me say a moment ago, it is all of the dedication to the craft photography segments that I've done so far. There are 5 of them. I'm going to put them in the order that they have appeared on the podcast so far. So it's going to kick off with an interview with my buddy Steve Drozell, some basic tips on beginner's guide to photography. Steve's an actual professional photographer. So much of what I've learned in photography has come from him and going on the photo trips with him. So I figured it would be a perfect way to give you some useful information on the podcast, having an actual pro with knowledge and not me saying point and shoot and then hope for the best. We're going to follow that segment up with a photo trip that Steve and I did to Martha's Vineyard. Some wacky photo trips that involve coyotes, some nighttime photo adventures, and most recently a photo trip over to the island of Nantucket. There's a lot of fun stuff in here. I hope that you enjoy it. Of course, before we start this mixtape, I cannot get started without thanking my Patreon subscribers, my biggest backers, the ones that put their money where their mouth is to support me, my never-ending quest to be a self-sustaining, self-employed content creator. Thank you to Laurie, Mary Lou, Ashley, Kevin, Leo, Marguerite, Neglectoid, Crystal, Matt, Dr. Shrimp, Porto Chico. You too can get a shout out on the podcast. $5 a month gets you access to bonus podcast episodes. It gets you access to the Without a Map live streams that I have remastered. It also gets you early access to YouTube videos, weeks, sometimes months before they go up on my YouTube channel. But enough of the intro, let's press play on this mixtape. If you need to, go grab yourself a second plate of turkey, mashed potatoes, stuffing, or just lay back on the couch, work through your food coma, as we get into dedication to the craft, all of the photo segments thus far on the podcast, here on mixtape number 2 of the In My Footsteps podcast. All right, so we are here for our dedication to the craft interview with my good friend Steve Drozell, who is an actual professional photographer, not a hack like me. And we're actually out on a real photo shoot. We're actually waiting for it to get a little darker to go shoot the Old Stone Church in West Boylston, Massachusetts. We figured what better way to pass the time waiting for it to get dark than to do this interview. So we'll start off for you, Steve. Just tell the listeners of the podcast about your experience as a photographer.
It started off years and years and years ago when I was younger, and I just took an interest to photography right away. I had a very basic point and shoot camera, took a lot of really bad photos, and kind of grew from there. It took off again in high school when I took photography with you and Greg, and I believe Garbett was in our class and a few other people. Started to love it more. When I went to college, I had to pick a major and decided to become an art major, and I specialized in photography even though it wasn't an actual art major, or it wasn't an actual major at my school. And then when I graduated, I figured, well, I should probably do something with my degree, and I had a few jobs before I actually got a chance to become a photojournalist at a newspaper in the New Hampshire Seacoast area. And I was there for 4 years before I left.
See, so he knows what he's doing. So that's why I chose him to kind of share this for people that are looking to get into photography or looking to better themselves in photography. In your opinion, what is the most important thing a novice photographer can learn to make their photos better?
I think the most important thing right from the get-go is whatever camera you plan on shooting with, have a good working knowledge of the camera to start. Knowing what it's capable of will go a long way. If you want to get better as a photographer, just keep shooting. Take a bunch of photos of stuff you love. It makes it a little easier when it's a subject matter that you enjoy taking pictures of. While you're out shooting, try and look for different ways to see the same scene, either shooting from different angles or shooting it in different weather, different times of day, different seasons. Look at other people's photos. If you see photos that you like, try and emulate those. And I'm not saying go out and shoot the exact same photo, but if there's a certain style or a certain angle, try and go figure out how they got that photo and replicate it for yourself. Another thing that I always see that drives me up a wall with people that just take pictures, they're like, oh, look at this, I took a picture of a boat, and the boat is the smallest thing in the frame of the photo. So get as close as you can to your subject. If you can't get physically close, get lenses that'll get you as close as you can. They always talk about filling the frame with your subject. Obviously, a landscape, you're going to want to look for something interesting in the photo that kind of anchors the photo, but the landscape itself will be the main feature of the frame. That's part of what I was saying, but make sure your subject takes up 50 to 85% of the frame. Two of the most important pieces of advice I can give are always be prepared. Have extra batteries, memory cards, or film if you're still shooting film. Be prepared for the elements, especially cold weather. Have gloves, extra layers, a hat. You don't want to miss out on something awesome because you weren't prepared and you get cold and have to go back to your car. The biggest thing, ask questions. Ask other photographers for advice. Most of them are usually willing to give advice and teach what they know. And if there's something specific, a technique that you're looking to try, Google it. With everything we have with the internet nowadays, chances are you're going to find what you're looking for. There's so many different things that people are doing now that they can shoot with just their phone and getting cool photos and images and videos that a lot of people also will post videos of how they got the shot or step-by-step technique to get the technique that they used to do what they did for the photo.
All right, so here's kind of an if-or. So if you could only have one of these, is it better to have the expensive photography equipment or that photographic eye to kind of see that great shot?
To be honest, for me, I used to think it was more important to have top-of-the-line equipment, and that's how you got the best stuff. But once cameras became more readily available on cell phones and the cameras on the phones themselves got better, I realized that it's really about the photographer and that you can take the crappiest equipment and get great photos if you know what you're doing and what you're looking for. If you insist on having a good camera and want a DSLR, which is a digital single reflex lens, which is basically the cameras that you can interchange the lenses, spend as much money as you can on the lenses. Like, get a decent camera body, but the image quality is going to, one, come from the photographer and what they see, but the better quality lenses are going to make the picture sharper and just look better in general. Having an eye for photography is something that can be learned, I think. I've noticed it with your work just from the early days of when we started shooting and how much better you've gotten. And there's times where, like, I see some of your photos and I'm like, damn, like, I wish I wish I could have shot that. I think a lot of it comes down to you actually make it a point to go out and shoot a lot more than I do. Like, I either just because I'm busy or I'm lazy a lot of times, I don't go out and shoot nearly as much as I used to. And again, your work has come such a long way, and I think it's literally just from going out and continuously shooting and pushing, and you've gotten better because of that. So I do think that having a photographic eye is something that can be learned if you pay attention to what you're doing and you learn from the repetition. You'll start to see the photos, get better as you learn what your camera can do also, and you learn the different techniques and try stuff. See what works for you. If it helps, keep a little notepad, a little journal with you when you go out to shoot and try something new, and take notes. Make little notes in the journal about, like, okay, I tried this didn't work, I'm going to try this next time, or I tried this while I was there and this worked. So that way, if it's not something you shoot regularly, at least you'll have notes the next time you go out, and you'll know what to do or how to set up the camera, what settings to use.
So it's literally trial and error. It's like, especially with digital, it's like you can take a million photos, and it's not like film where you shoot and then you've got to wait to get it developed and pray, like, oh God, make sure this is all right.
At this point, I've been shooting digital just a little bit longer than I was shooting film when I was actually doing it a lot as a photojournalist, and also in college. I know the diehards, like the old school guys, will probably tell you that there was a richness to photos and film, and I think a lot of it was also something tangible. You could hold the film, you could touch the prints, and you can obviously still get digital stuff printed and hold it and touch it, but I don't think it's the same for a lot of the old school guys like that. For me personally, I like the instant gratification of seeing what I just shot and being able to adjust things as I go without wasting film. Film at this point, with the way I shoot and like some of our photo trips where we're shooting a couple hundred photos at a whack, those are the ones that we haven't deleted while we were out because we screwed up the shot or it didn't come out quite the way we wanted it. So in that sense, with film, it would get very expensive having to process the film and buying the film, and you might even miss out on an awesome moment because you're in the middle of either waiting for the film to rewind or you were changing out the film. So that's one huge advantage that I think digital has over the film cameras. It also takes some of the human element out of it. There's cons to both digital and film. I've had issues with the film processor when I worked at the newspaper that either something went wrong with the machine itself and the chemicals screwed up the film, which is not something you want to have to explain to the editor either that day or at 5 o'clock the next morning when he comes in asking where the photos were. The digital is nice because it takes that human error element out of the equation. The downside to that is you're trusting a computer. Digital cameras can crap out. The computer inside the camera itself can crap out. Phones die. You drop your phone, you break your phone, and you forgot to upload or save to the cloud a bunch of pictures you just took. So that stuff's gone. I have a friend of mine who I used to work with at the newspaper that I remember a few years ago. He's actually still a professional photographer, and his computer died, and I believe he lost hundreds of photos, if not a couple thousand photos of his that were all shot digitally. My biggest advice for stuff like that is get an external hard drive. If you're going to make photography a career choice, if you become good enough at it, buy a second external hard drive. It's never a bad thing to have backups of your backups of your backups.
Yeah, better to have too many backups than you have one set and you lose them.
Exactly.
Definitely get an external hard drive. I've got 2 of them.
Yeah, on the film end with that, if you're not careful and really good about archiving your film, film can get scratched up, film can get damaged, and then it's basically a permanent ruin on the image itself because you can't really fix the film itself once it's damaged.
So we're here at the Old Stone Church. Well, we're a couple hundred yards from it. And this was a spot that's been on our list to shoot for several years. So the last question here is, what is the place that you would like to photograph more than any, and why would you like to shoot that?
I don't have any one particular place. There's a lot of places I would love to shoot. One in particular, as you know, that I'm very jealous that you've already been to, was West Quoddy Lighthouse, and that general area, Lubec, Maine. The podcast episode where you were talking about Lubec, Maine, and just the general area, I've seen the pictures of the lighthouses. I know that part of it, but the rest of it sounds like it's an awesome place to shoot. There's the Grand Canyon, for obvious reasons, national parks in Arizona. All the natural features out there would be amazing. Like in Utah, I think, too. Hawaii. Alaska is definitely up near the top of that list. That's just in the U.S. I mean, there's other places that I would absolutely love to go. Like, I know there's somewhere in Thailand where there's a bay that there's all these amazing islands and stuff like that. I've been to the Caribbean quite a few times and still feel like I could go back there and take a lot more photos. And I think it's not necessarily places that, you know, a lot of people want to go and shoot. I think you can make incredible photos wherever you are. It depends on how you want to look at things. I think that's the biggest thing, especially some of our big photo trips. Like, I think one of the ones was where we were going up to Owl's Head, Maine, and we left before sunrise because we were intent on stopping at Sohair Park in York, Maine to shoot the Nubble Lighthouse at sunrise, and then still drive another, whatever it was, like 2.5, 3 hours from there up to Owlhead and shot that, and then worked our way back down the coast, stopping at other iconic lighthouses like Marshall's Point, which is where Forrest Gump ran to when he was out running across the country in the movie. Yes. I mean, stuff like that, like places that I haven't been to that I've been looking forward to. I get like this nervous energy, just an excitement about it, knowing what potential there is. But I think a lot of it too, we get sidetracked easily, and we end up making multiple stops along the way and find other things to shoot. A little bit of advice is, if you're traveling somewhere to shoot something specific, keep your eyes open. You'll be surprised what you'll find along the way. You know, you'll always end up shooting more than what you had intended.
Absolutely. I mean, we did it just today, the Wachusett Dam.
Yep.
That ended up being an extra spot. So are you ready to go take some shots of the Old Stone Church now after dark? Because it is now pretty much there.
Yeah, it should be dark enough, unless this guy's kicking us out.
Uh-oh,
Park ranger.
There's a park ranger coming over here. Well, in case we get kicked out, I wanted to say thank you so much, Steve, for being on the podcast. I've learned so much from you in photography, so it's one of those that I guess I could say I'm living proof of the repetition and the learning as you go. So anyone out there, listen to Steve and take that advice. And if you become a photographer because of this, or you feel your work got better because of this, definitely shoot me an email, send some thanks, and I will send them along to Steve.
Awesome. Sounds good.
All right, let's get out in the cold and start shooting this Old Stone Church.
All right.
Thank you so much to Steve Drozell for taking some time out of our photo trip to share some of what makes photography so much fun and what you can do to get into photography. And I'll try to put up a photo of our nighttime shoot at the Old Stone Church. We did get some good photos. He also wanted me to give a shout out to his father, Steve Drozell, also, Papa D, wishing him a happy birthday, because when this podcast gets released, it will be his birthday. So happy birthday, Mr. Drozell. I know you hate when I say that. Happy birthday, Papa D. And thanks again to Steve for doing this interview. It's a sad yet funny thing to admit, but before 2013, I had actually never been over to either of the main Cape Cod islands, Nantucket or Martha's Vineyard. And I grew up on Cape Cod. People were shocked that I never took a day trip there, never went with family or school. But it was true. Until 2013, I had never stepped on the shores of either island. After the publication of my first book, In My Footsteps, a Cape Cod Travel Guide, through Schiffer Publishing in 2013, naturally I was wondering what was next. I didn't want to just have one book and then that was the end. So I pitched to Schiffer a book about Martha's Vineyard and Nantucket. They liked this idea, but they actually liked the idea better of doing one book for each island, which I was fine with. Having 3 books instead of 2 was just perfect with me. I was lucky. I went over to the Vineyard a total of 6 times for the book, and I was very lucky because I had a contact, a good friend named Bill, who was a bigwig with the Massachusetts Office of Travel and Tourism, and he was able to finagle getting me over to the island by basically comping my tickets and my vehicle pass, and I couldn't have done this book without him. Go to Steamship Authority right now and see how much it costs you to bring a vehicle over to either island. It's unbelievable. So it was several $100s I saved over the time that I went to the islands. This here that I'm going to talk about with this dedication to the craft segment, this is trip number 4, and it was on October 12th of 2014. This was the second time I brought my buddy Steve with me, because if you're able to get a vehicle over there for nothing, why not share the wealth and bring someone else who will enjoy and appreciate getting to do some photography at the Vineyard is amazing if you've never been there. And while I know he enjoyed the trip, Steve was in for a little bit of, not a rude awakening, but for this trip, for the book, instead of just having natural places, beaches, and things like that, I also had a lot of shops and hotels and restaurants, which meant that in addition to doing some fun travel shooting, I had to drive around and stop in front of all of these different businesses and get pictures of the business and the signs and such to put in the book. So I was plugging these places into my GPS if I needed to find them. You know, places like the Sweet Life Cafe, Allie's General Store, and the Tuck and Holland Metalworks. Tuck and Holland is in Vineyard Haven and at tuckandholland.com. But the funny thing about this was I intended to go there and just get a picture outside and then talk about it in the book. But when I pulled up, one of the guys was actually outside doing some work. So I pulled up and Steve thought I was going to be 2 minutes. Like I'd go up and say hi and get a photo. But the guy, he was really nice. And I told him what I was doing and he brought me inside the shop. And before I knew it, it was 20, 25 minutes. I felt bad. It was like Steve was a dog left in the car. At least he had the windows down. I remember at the time of doing this trip that they were doing a Jaws weather vane, and they had kind of the sketches for it. That was pretty neat. It wasn't done, but still, it was cool to see things that were in the works. We left there. I felt a little bad for leaving Steve in the car. So we went to the Island Alpaca Company, which is also in Vineyard Haven on Head of the Pond Road. And it seems like it's out of place on the island, where you think of it as being like beachfront property and luxury hotels and such. And yet here's this big farm with these cute little alpacas of different sizes and colors. And you go up to the fence and they come over and you can feed them and even buy them. I debated it. I thought it might be able to fit in my back seat, a little one, but I got plenty of great shots, action shots of the alpacas. And Steve actually came out, but I was starting to feel bad, but I knew he'd feel better the next stop. We were going over to Chappaquiddick and going to Cape Pogue Lighthouse. The Chappie Ferry, it's literally only a couple of 100 feet. Like by the time they start the engine up on these little ferry boats, you're already on the other side. The best part of this, though, was that there was the trustees of the reservation. They take people out there because it's a couple miles over soft sand, so I wouldn't want to take my car. I'd be stuck. And my buddy Bill, he arranged for us to be a part of this trip. And when we got there, we were late. And so the guy was waiting with a couple of people for a tour. And I could hear him asking about, we're waiting for an author to take him out there. And I kind of waved, that's me. I'm sorry, I'm late. I highly recommend the trip, though. Even if you don't like lighthouses, the drive out there over the soft sand, you're where people really aren't. There have been at least 4 light towers built out there where Cape Pogue currently is. And when you're on the way out there, you can actually see bits and pieces of old foundations and chimneys are standing. And it's crazy. The current lighthouse is from 1893. And interestingly, from the top, that's the only place where you can see Nantucket Island. Nantucket proper is about 15 miles from Cape Pogue Lighthouse. It appears as just a little blob of land on the horizon, and it has to be a clear day. It was clear when I was there, so I got a picture of Nantucket from the Vineyard. But that's an interesting fact. The tour itself took a while. We're talking hour and a half. So by the time we got back to my car and got in the Chappie Ferry to go back to the mainland at Edgartown, it was getting to the point where we knew we had to find a sunset spot. That was my main selling point for Steve, was to get a killer Martha's Vineyard sunset photo, and it was a toss-up. It was a toss-up between Gayhead Lighthouse and Menemsha. So for those that aren't familiar, Menemsha in the movie Jaws, that is where Quint has his boat. When they sail out on the Orca, they're going through Menemsha. I had a crazy idea to maybe be able to get to both places, but from the Edgartown docks to Menemsha was 15 miles, and out to Gayhead Light in Aquina was 20 miles. Being that I had dragged Steve all around the island, and besides Cape Pogue, it was a lot of just shooting places for the book, outsides of businesses and the alpacas, I felt bad, so I conceded, and I said, we're going to go to Gayhead Light, because that was where he wanted to go. Once we got there, I knew we weren't going to have time to do both. And another thing was that we got there and pulled up, and Steve was off. He was off taking his photos. The sunset was great, but my phone died, so I wanted to get pictures with my phone to just throw them up on social media, but that didn't happen. I got some great photos, and it was great. I just wish I still haven't gotten that Menemsha sunset photo, and we're going on 7 years later. But lighthouses combined with a sunset, you can't go wrong with photography like that. It's just a matter of you could take dozens of photos, slightly different angles, slightly different times, and you get different colors and different shadows. So it ended up being worth it. I really enjoyed that. Menemsha, I'm sure, would have been good too, but Gayhead Light was great. So then after sunset, we had to head back to catch the last ferry off the island. That was the other. It's like we should have had action movie music playing. Sadly, I wanted to get some donuts at Backdoor Donuts in Oak Bluffs, which they literally open at 7 p.m. and sell the freshly made donuts out the back door. They're open during the day, too, when you go in the front, but it's not the same. You want them hot and fresh. And as we were driving by to go back to the ferry in Vineyard Haven, it was a line 30, 40 people deep, and this is October. And they were all waiting, so I knew I wasn't going to get a donut from Backdoor Donuts, but we were hungry, so we had to get something. We had a little time when we got back to the ferry terminal in Vineyard Haven, so we stopped and we grabbed something quick at Porto Pizza. It's just steps from the ferry dock. And the pizza was good, but the highlight of this was, it's after dark. It's October, so it's cool. It's really nice, and we had a great day of photography. I got everything I needed. And I look walking around the picnic tables where we're eating is a skunk, just walking around like it's no big deal. Because I didn't realize at the time, but there's really no predators over there, so these skunks don't have any fear of getting eaten by a coyote or a fox. They just wander around. It's like a squirrel, but one that can spray you. Even though it seemed friendly, I did not engage with it, did not feed it. I didn't want to get sprayed and ruin the end of the trip that way. We made the ferry and got back to the Cape, and that was the end of Martha's Vineyard Trip 4 from October of 2014. If you're curious about some of those photos, check out In My Footsteps, A Traveler's Guide to Martha's Vineyard. That was what these photos I ended up taking. That's the book it ended up being in. It's through Schiffer Publishing. Thanks to Steve for coming along, and he got some great shots too. If any of you out there that listen to the podcast follow me on Instagram, you see how much I like sunset photography. In the last few years, when I upgraded my camera to something much better, I started really getting into night photography and long exposure photography. The thing about sunsets and night photography is you have to do these shoots at dusk and after dark. And you may not know this, but there are animals that come out at dusk and after dark that aren't normally visible during the day. And me and my buddy Steve, when we go to do sunset shoots, after dark, long exposure shoots, we don't think about running into animals or running into any dangerous situations. We think about getting the photo, dedication to the craft. I definitely, way more than Steve, have less regard for my own safety when getting a good shot. I've had times that I've gone places and gotten some pretty cool shots when I look back after the fact that I could have been seriously hurt or killed. I talked about the West Barnstable Brick Factory back in episode 68. I don't think I mentioned the fact that when I first went to go to find the remains of the factory itself, I ended up scaling this tree, and I was a good 20 feet up in the air above all the vines and such, trying to find the facade of this factory, and I ended up almost slipping. I was hanging on to the branch. I could have easily dropped and been killed, and nobody would have found me forever because I was just deep in the overgrown woods. So this dedication to the craft, part 4, is going to look at one specific danger, one specific animal that I've had several run-ins with during my photography career, and that is the lovely coyote. A quick overview: a coyote is a canine. It's a relative of the wolf. It's smaller. They typically top out at like 50 pounds, but they can be bigger than that. They normally shy away from humans, but there have been videos and such of coyotes kind of stalking people, so they're not something to be messed with. They eat both animals and plants. They're common now on Cape Cod, more so than I remember when I was a kid growing up. It seems like growing up in the 80s, there were few, if any, coyotes, seals, turkeys, and sharks, but they're everywhere now. When looking for sunset spots, places to shoot, especially in the summer where there's people everywhere, you have to kind of go off the beaten path and find places that people don't frequent or don't know about. Typically, these are heavily wooded, which means they're home to coyotes. So this leads to the first of my coyote encounters. It's a place in Brewster along the Bayside beaches. It's a lesser-known trail, but when you hike out there, it's a little over half a mile to get out there, but you get to these bluffs that overlook. The sunset is always good there based on the position of the trail and Cape Cod Bay and such. But this story, I remember Steve and I both went out there. Typically for sunset shots, we look to get out there half hour, 20 minutes before the sun goes down. That's when you really get the colors, especially if you got clouds. It's amazing. And what you do is you take a few photos, wait a few minutes, watch the sky change, take a few more, etc. Shooting sunsets is not difficult. It's just a matter of going out and actually doing it. When you go to the beach, if you're someone that likes to go and view the sunsets, you'll notice at the beach parking lots, there's a lot of people there standing with their phones in front of their faces, which is how everyone thinks they're a professional photographer these days. But what you'll notice is when the sun gets right to the end, when it sinks below the skyline, that's when people will leave. And that's where the people that know about sunsets and sunset photography, that's where they really make their money. So my buddy Steve and I will always wait 20 minutes after sunset before we leave. You get the afterglow. Well, the afterglow happens obviously after the sun sets at dusk. And at dusk, that's when the coyotes start to come out. So Steve and I got done shooting. It's pretty much almost dark out now. We're hiking back down the trail. It's a half a mile in the dark, essentially, to get back to my car. And that's when we start to hear the coyotes howling. And not just one, but at least half a dozen howling and talking to each other. And it's dark, so you don't know where exactly they are. All we could figure out was that the sound was between us and my car. So there's nothing that'll put a chill up your spine than a whole bunch of coyotes howling and knowing that there's a chance you may have to go through them to get back to safety. Obviously, nothing happened on that trip. I believe I said something sweet to Steve, like, oh, I'll just outrun you so the coyotes can catch you, which is there's the all for one, one for all of dedication to the craft. But it was scary in the dark with the coyotes like that. Man. Sometimes, though, interactions with coyotes. They're not as scary because you're not up close, but they're nonetheless kind of bone-chilling. I did a shoot after dark at the Cape Cod Canal on the Cape side. So you go up to Sandwich, there's the Canal Visitors Center. It's where the bike trail along the canal begins. And I wanted to get a shot of the power plant and with the Sagamore Bridge in the background. If you're not familiar with the canal, all these descriptions aren't going to make much sense to you. Just know that I was up there way after dark with my camera, with my tripod, and I'm just taking shots, long exposures, seeing how they look. This was probably late fall, so it wasn't that late. But across the canal on the mainland side is a place called Scusset Beach. It's a big beach park camping area. It's really nice, but it's also really desolate over there. And I'm on my side just shooting the power plant, shooting the bridge. And from across the canal, you hear the sound of coyote, soon followed by a sound of something getting killed. I mean, probably a rabbit, but it was just awful to hear the sounds of this thing getting ripped to shreds, even though it was a couple 100 feet away across the water. Even now, I'm like, ugh, because I can hear the noise of the rabbit just being ripped to shreds. More recently, I was at Englewood Beach, which is in West Yarmouth. Again, after dark, just taking some shots of the boats that are now there on the docks. And Englewood Beach is part of Lewis Bay, so the bay kind of circles around to Great Island. And along the water, there's obviously homes from the real rich people that put their McMansions on the coastline here on Cape Cod now. So we're talking several hundred yards away on the other side of the water. I start hearing the coyotes, at least 3 of them, just howling to each other. And in my mind, I'm starting to figure out how far they are and how long it would take them, even at a full sprint, to get to where I was. And I figured I had a good 4 or 5 minutes if they came charging me, but they didn't know I was there. And why didn't they know I was there? Because some little miniature dog or something like that started yipping at them from outside wherever the house was that the dog lived. So now we got 3 coyotes yelling at this little dog that's yipping back at them. And I'm thinking back to the rabbit story. So I'm waiting to hear this dog get ripped to shreds. And it goes on for a couple minutes before finally the owner of the dog came out. You could hear the guy yell. So the dog finally shuts up. He brings it inside, and that dog was lucky. 3 coyotes, woo. And no, they didn't charge me. They probably went the other way. My king of coyote stories that I dealt with during my photography trips has to be my Highland Light story from Truro. That place is very desolate after dark. It's on a golf course, but it's the National Seashore, so there's lots and lots of open land. I took my camera, my tripod, walked way out towards the bluffs and just taking photos of the lighthouse. At first, it was right at sunset, and to my right, I could hear probably a dozen coyotes just howling and yipping at the sunset. At least then it was light out a little bit, but oh my God, like you're way out there. Like I said, in between me and my car, probably 1,000 feet, and you could hear a dozen coyotes yipping. So I wanted to go back to my car and warm up a little and wait for it to get really dark so I could get some long exposure shots of the lighthouse. So I went back and sat in my car for probably 20, 25 minutes. I had my flashlight when I walked back out as I took the trail behind the lighthouse. It's bordered by a fence on either side. You go out to where the observation deck is, like that area, if you're familiar with Highland Lighthouse. So I'm out there doing now long exposure shoots, 15 seconds, 20 seconds. And during one, it must have been a 30-second shoot, and I'm just waiting for the timer for the shutter to go off. And that's when I hear the same coyotes, at least a dozen, but this time they're now on my left and not my right, which means that in the time that I was in my car, they all migrated across the golf course. And I don't know how long it was after I walked back or how soon before I came back out that they did that, but it's pretty bone-chilling to know that all those coyotes were in your vicinity and they basically could have crossed your path at any time. So I'm waiting for the shutter to go off as I hear the coyotes like, come on, because I don't know how far away they are because you can't see them. It's night. But it wouldn't have done me any good if a dozen coyotes came after me. There was nobody near there. I could have screamed all I wanted. Nobody would have heard me. They'd have just found my camera and my clothes. That's definitely the scariest one. That's one of the scariest shoots I've ever been on. Have you ever dealt with coyotes up close, or have you ever dealt with any other animals? And I mean vicious ones, not ones like deer that if you look at them wrong, they run away. There was a time that I was waiting to go live when I used to do my live streams for the podcast, that I was outside in my car and a coyote walked by my car at dusk and literally took a dump in the yard and stared at me while I was waiting to go live. There's nothing creepier than a big coyote staring at you while it takes a crap in your yard. Nighttime photography can be one of the most rewarding and also one of the most frustrating things that photographers can do. For every one photo that looks amazing, you've got dozens or more that are just complete garbage. Luckily, thus far, this is one area of photography that smartphones hasn't really capitalized on. Because in reality, a lot of people with smartphones can take great photos because the cameras keep evolving. I don't know how it is with the newest of the new smartphones that are out now, but I know with mine that's a couple of years old, nighttime photography, it's okay, but nowhere near as good as you can do with an actual real DSLR camera. Since this is a new dedication to the craft segment, I'm going to be giving some basic information along with some really funny stories about my nighttime photography adventures. Those who have no idea, DSLR or SLR for cameras, it's digital single lens reflex camera or single lens reflex camera. I always equate DSLR with real camera, quote unquote, not a smartphone. SLR cameras can cost you anywhere from a couple of $100s to several $1,000s depending on what you're looking for. Naturally, if you're a hobbyist or a hack like me, you get one that's lower on the cost scale and then use your intangibles as far as framing of photos and having the ability to find places that others don't go to kind of make up for the lack of expensive equipment. I mean, I wish I had the kind of equipment that my buddy Steve has, but I make do with what I have. My favorite time of year for nighttime photography is the winter, I guess selfishly because sunset is so early. To get real, true, good nighttime photography, you've got to go out typically about an hour after sunset to start getting good shots. So if it's June or July, you're looking at starting to go out to take night photos at 9:30 or 10 o'clock. So the irony is I think most of these stories I'm going to share are in wintertime. So let me start sharing the laughter and embarrassment, and I'll kind of give you photo tips based around my stories to kind of help you not do the same things I did. The number one thing you need when taking night photos is a tripod. If you don't have a tripod, you might as well not even go out, not even bother. Because everything that has to do with night photography is long exposure, leaving your shutter open for several seconds or much longer. So if you're holding a camera with the shutter open, all you have to do is have a breeze touch you, and it's going to make the picture blurry, and then it's ruined. Me being stubborn, or perhaps the FOMO of seeing other people's photos, I had times that I would go out night shooting without a tripod. This was before I had a really good camera. I had point-and-shoot digitals like the Fuji Fine Pix, or even GE made a camera. That was one I had. Those cameras and most SLR cameras have a maximum shutter time of 30 seconds it'll stay open. Unless you get one that has, I believe it's bulb mode, and the shutter will just stay open so you get a remote shutter. My buddy Steve got me one. Then you press and hold it and the thing will stay open for hours if you need. That's how you see people get the Milky Way photos and such. They leave the shutter open for several minutes. So before I had a tripod, I would go out, sometimes with people, sometimes by myself, to do some night shooting. And I would have to find things to balance the camera on, to sit it on, and then do the timer and the long exposure. So you hit the countdown timer, so it's 2 seconds, 3 seconds. Then the shutter stays open for however long. And then you wait and hope that it's good. Man, I tell you, out of all those trips I did, night shooting without a tripod, I might have had 2 or 3 photos out of hundreds that were any good. So get yourself a tripod. They're not that expensive. I just looked. Good ones, they're anywhere from $15 to $50, depending on what you want to spend. A great advantage of night photography is being able to have light play tricks with the camera at times. One time I went with my buddy Steve to Nobska Lighthouse in Falmouth on Cape Cod. A beautiful, perfect night photography spot in the winter. Nobody's there. The first time we went, I didn't have a tripod, so all my photos were crap. But Steve had his, and there was one photo he took, long exposure with the lighthouse, and while the shutter was open, 2 joggers came running by with their headlamps on. So there's a photo of Nobska Lighthouse with these 2 blue lightning bolts going through the shot. It's wild. Sometimes you get things like cars driving through your shot. I have a few photos of Chatham Lighthouse with the headlight trails going through it. And of course you can do it intentionally. You see people do that, either running through the photo, holding a flashlight to create patterns. People do the flaming steel wool where they light it on fire and spin it around and it's crazy looking. Night photography leads a lot of chances to be creative. I have a great photo from Nobska with my buddy Steve. He was in front of me taking a picture of the lighthouse, and I had the shutter open for probably 60 seconds. And for the first 30 seconds, he's in front of me, and then for the other 30, he's left. So the photo, it looks like a ghost standing in between me and the lighthouse. So if I wanted to scam people, I could say it was a picture of a ghost at Nobska. After getting a tripod, the next most important thing for nighttime photography is to dress appropriately and have patience. Because a lot of night photography is standing around. So if it's after dark in December, January, and it's 20 degrees, and you're waiting 20, 30 seconds for your shutter to open and praying the photo is clear and not blurry because the breeze shook your camera, you need to be dressed appropriately. Also bring a flashlight, not just to see where you're going, but to shine on something to get the camera to focus. I can only speak from my experiences, but I've had to have a flashlight shining on something if it's complete darkness, so my camera will then focus on it and then I can hit the shutter button. Most times when you're out shooting at night, you're typically somewhere where there is something lit up that you can focus on, but bring a flashlight anyway. A big thing to remember when it comes to night photography is if you're out after dark, nocturnal animals will be around. Way back in episode 76 of the podcast, I did a dedication to the craft about coyote adventures and specifically told a story about taking photos at night and at sunset of Highland Lighthouse in Truro and 2 encounters with groups of coyotes. So I won't rehash that. You can go check that episode out. However, it's important to remember there could be creatures in the dark that you don't see. Of course, I have examples. My buddy Steve and I, who's always the photo travel tag team partner, so you'll hear his name a lot, we went to shoot this place called the Forefathers Monument in Plymouth. And shooting that after dark, it's amazing to get this 80-foot tall granite statue with the stars behind it. In fact, I think one of my photos I took from this trip ended up being in their guidebook in 2021, I think. There's a big open field in front and around this statue, but there's also steps directly in front of it with bushes on either side. So, of course, instead of going to the wide open field, I decided to walk up the steps, and I must have gotten too close to a family of sleeping birds in the bush, because they came flying out at me. So it goes from perfectly silent to these birds squawking and flying at me. I scream like I just got jumped by 5 people. And so Steve's yelling, "What happened? What happened?" And I said, "Birds flew at me." I think he just literally was like, oh my God, yeah, all right. Sometimes the nocturnal animals make your photos 1 in a million. One time we were shooting at the harbor in Duxbury, where one of the piers had this amazing Christmas tree on it, so it looked even better at night. I set up my camera on my tripod, focusing across the water on this tree. I clicked the shutter and stood there letting it absorb all the light, and during the photo, a great blue heron landed on the railing in front of my camera. So that first photo looks like a snow squall entering the picture. And it sat there long enough for me to get another photo of it, crystal clear. Oh, it was so good. It's one of the best photos I ever took. Of course, as soon as the shutter clicked to let me know the photo was done, the heron heard it, looked at me, and took off. Of course, when it comes to night shooting and animal encounters, sometimes you're on the periphery of what's going on. I love going and shooting the canal bridges, the Cape Cod Canal. There are 3 bridges that go across it, the Sagamore, the Bourne, and the Railroad Bridge. I typically go up there once or twice a year in the winter, shoot the same photos repeatedly, but I still love them. At the eastern end of the Cape Cod Canal, there's a power plant on the Cape side, and across from it on the mainland side is Scusset Beach, which is a really large area. You can camp there, but it's also crawling with critters. So I'm out there a couple years ago on the Cape side, shooting towards the Sagamore Bridge with the canal power plant on the left, when I hear across from me at Scusset Beach the sound that I can only describe as an animal being caught and then eaten. It was so bad, and but there's literally nothing I could do. I can't yell across at the coyote or whatever it was and say, you leave that rabbit alone. So I had to just listen to this animal getting killed and eaten, echoing off of the water. Sometimes the animal encounters you bring on yourself. One of my nighttime photo stories, and stories in general where I look back and say, what the hell was I doing, was when I borrowed my buddy Steve's tripod and took my old, less reputable camera. This was probably 10 years ago. And I walked after dark all the way out to Stage Harbor Lighthouse in Chatham. It's at Harding's Beach, so it's like a mile walk. And yes, there are coyotes out there. But I decided it would be fun to take all this out to shoot Stage Harbor Light, but also bring some nips of vodka with me so I could drink and get a good buzz on before going to take photos at night in the dark surrounded by coyotes. Oh, but wait, it gets better. So I'm out there at Stage Harbor Light taking a few photos. I don't know how they're coming out because my brain is all buzzed. I look behind me and I see this kind of tower set up with a ladder. So I'm thinking, oh, it's a weather station. I could climb up there with the tripod and get these cool elevated photos of the lighthouse with the dunes behind it. So I'm hauling my camera and the tripod, going up the ladder with a vodka buzz going through me, and I start hearing noises above my head. Luckily, it was nearly a full moon, so it was a little bit brighter, but I get almost to the top of this weather station, and only then do I see things starting to move, because what I was climbing up to was an osprey nest, and they were sleeping. One of the osprey squawks. I took one step down the ladder and then jumped because it was sand, so at worst I was going to get sandy. I look up and in the moonlight there's one black object circling around. That ended my shoot. Like I said, I have no idea what the point was of that photo trip. Stage Harbor Light is all well and good, and I've gone out there completely sober. But why did I have to have a few shots of alcohol to bring me out there? So for night photography, I would highly recommend a good DSLR camera, a tripod, dress warmly, be patient, play it safe rather than taking risks like me with the Osprey. But if you insist on going out there with your phone, always keep tabs on where it is. So we'll end this segment with this story that is mind-numbingly stupid. Maybe not as bad as the Osprey one, but up there. I went after dark once to shoot a video of the railroad bridge across the Cape Cod Canal being down with a train going across it. So it's a long video, of the bridge coming down and a train going across and the bridge going back up. It's not that bright, but it's still cool because you don't get to see that often. I think it's twice a day that bridge goes up and down. So I shot this probably 6-minute video with my iPhone, and when it was done, I got up out of the rocks down by the edge of the canal and climbed back up to the bike trail and walked back to the parking lot where my car was. Unlocked my car, got in, went to grab my phone to see how the video came out, and that's when I realized I didn't have my phone. No, I wasn't drunk and imagining I had my phone. I had actually shot the video, but when I got up to get out of the rocks, my phone fell out of my coat and into the rocks. I had to grab a flashlight and walk back in the dark, probably a quarter mile, hoping that I remembered where I went down into the rocks to sit and get the view for the video. And then if I found the right spot, I had to reach around inside the rocks and hope I could find my phone and not syringes and broken glass. The story has a happy ending. I did find my phone, but good Lord, I needed to get a chain on that thing like the cheesy wallets. But that wraps up Dedication to the Craft, nighttime photo adventures with hopefully a little bit of helpful information too. Because I wanted to give you some laughs, but I also wanted to give you something useful you could take with you. For those that might be new here, the idea of dedication to the craft, it's something that me and my buddy Steve came up with. The gist of it is it's putting yourself in danger or out of your comfort zone, I guess, to get the photo you're looking to get. For us, a lot of the time it comes down to going out in perhaps cold weather, windy weather, driving to places people wouldn't normally go, hiking out in the woods to find things. And as I share these adventures on the podcast, I do try to drop a little bit of knowledge, what I have as far as photography goes. I'm not a professional photographer. My buddy Steve is more of that. He actually worked in newspapers and such for photography. Me, I joke that I'm a hack, but I do have a photography book that you can buy. I have a photography shop now on Etsy that I reopened that you heard me talk about a few weeks back. So I do know what I'm doing. I kind of sell myself short as a joke, but I wouldn't do these segments if I didn't think that I could offer something to you out there besides laughs at the stories themselves. And speaking of laughs, so we are going back to November of 2014 and a trip from Cape Cod over to the island of Nantucket, located 30 miles off the Cape Cod coast. I was going to Nantucket to get photos for a book I was writing, a travel guide. It was my third book that was released in 2017. I was so lucky to have a connection at the Massachusetts Office of Travel and Tourism, my old friend Bill D'Souza Mock. Such a good man, a good friend, someone that just wanted to help me, a young author, succeed. So he kind of hooked me up with tickets on the Steamship Authority ferry, allowing me to bring my buddy Steve to bring his Jeep with him. I kid you not, those of you that know me, that know my history with writing, and I've got 9 books and all that, the only book that I've written that I could say Bill didn't have any influence on was the very first Cape Cod travel guide. And that's only because I didn't know him yet. Every other book I've written, either he has helped with things like I'm talking about getting over to Nantucket, or connecting me with other publishers. And then these books that I've written have opened the eyes of other publishers. So it's a whole lot. I just want to give him his props, give him his flowers. The main point of this dedication to the craft segment is not just the trip to Nantucket, but where Steve and I were going. He and I are huge lighthouse fans. On the island of Nantucket, there are a few lighthouses. Brant Point, everyone sees that when you come into Nantucket on the ferry. It's one of the most well-known lighthouses in the country. There is Sankaty Head Lighthouse, which is white and red striped right on the golf course, right on the east coast of Nantucket. But the main selling point, really the reason that I was able to get Steve to bring his Jeep over, was the fact that we would be allowed to drive out to Great Point Lighthouse. Great Point Lighthouse is at the tip of Nantucket, and for those of you that aren't familiar with it, it is in a very remote location. Sure, you could try to walk out to it and literally take all day, or you could take an off-road vehicle, a Jeep, something like that. In order to do that, you typically have to have some kind of an off-road pass. This is where Bill came in and hooked us up. We arrived at Nantucket Harbor and immediately took Steve's Jeep and started heading east. In the off-season and outside of downtown Nantucket, it can be very desolate. There's not lots of people, so keep that in mind. So the last bit of civilization, I guess, is a bed and breakfast called the Wawanet. Once you get past that, then what you've got to do is, if you're going off-roading, you've got to deflate your tires some so that you can drive over the soft sand. So we did that, but here's where the dedication to the craft comes in. Steve and I start heading north towards Great Point Lighthouse. To get there, it's more than 5 miles on the soft sand with nobody. There is nobody around. I chatted with my buddy Steve about this trip, and I said, what do you remember about that time we went out to Great Point? And he said it was basically a series of small heart attacks as he worried about his tires either blowing or getting stuck, and knowing that we were in the middle of nowhere. For me, I got to be the passenger. So we're driving, we're going slow. It must have been less than a mile north that we were driving when we noticed something white and fluffy in the dunes. It turned out to be a snowy owl. The best part was me being the passenger. I was able to hop right out of the Jeep, grab my camera, and start snapping photos of this snowy owl sitting in the dunes just looking at us. And by the time Steve would get his camera and get out of the Jeep, the owl had realized what we were doing and it would take off and fly away. But it would fly ahead of us, so it would land again, and this process repeated itself a couple times. That's kind of the issue with any sort of nature photography. Typically, you get one shot at it, whether it's birds or something, squirrels, rabbits, whatever type of animal is in the area where you are. I'm pretty sure I got several good photos of the owl. I don't know if Steve got any, because he would have to stop the Jeep, put it in park, grab his camera, get out. Me, I was diving out of the Jeep while it was still going. When you're way out towards Great Point Lighthouse on Nantucket, you really get to see the scope of what nature can do. The erosion that has just decimated that area. The Koskata-Kochu Wildlife Preserve. Longtime listeners will remember way back in episode 21, I did a segment about the grounding of the ship Eldia at Nauset Beach in 1984. I mentioned also in that same storm that Great Point Lighthouse on Nantucket, the original, was knocked down and destroyed. The lighthouse that's out there now was built in 1986. The area surrounding Great Point Lighthouse was actually turned into an island for a little while because of that storm. So when you're driving out there and you're close to the lighthouse, there's not a lot of land on either side of you. At one point, the thickness of the beach is only about 200 feet. I remember this day that we went out there, it was chilly, it was cloudy, it was not perfect for photos of a beautiful lighthouse, of the Nantucket landscape, but we were getting a favor done for us by Bill, so it wasn't like I could say, hey, could you pay for us to have a bed and breakfast and then we'll go shoot the lighthouse tomorrow? Sometimes when it comes to photography, photo trips, like I said, you get one chance and you've got to kind of make the best of it. You can do little bits of post-editing, make it brighter, make it a little more colorful, but you've also got to watch out that you don't turn it into some kind of clown show photo. I enjoy Lightroom. I enjoy the Snapseed app. But if I'm looking to sell a photo of mine, sell a print of mine, the photos are basically raw. They might be straightened so they're not shifted to one side so it at least looks normal, or maybe cropped a little, but I keep any edits to a minimum. It's just an integrity thing. There were a few hiccups as we were driving out to Great Point Light. We never got stuck, but we would slow down. And Steve, he did mention a couple times, if we get stuck, where do we go? No cell phone reception. It's the off season, so you'd have to, walk till you got cell phone reception and then what? Call AAA to drive 5 miles out in the sand to get you? We'd have had a better chance of lassoing a bunch of seals and having them just swim the Jeep back to Cape Cod. Yes, speaking of seals. So eventually we get out to Great Point Light. We are running around, taking as many photos as possible because we figured this may be the only chance we get to get out there. And looking back 11 years later, it has been. That's the thing. If you think you're in an area that you may never get back to for photography, you take as many photos as possible, as many angles, doubles of the same spot, just in case. It's better to have 50 photos of the same thing than to have one and it doesn't come out well and you're like, oh man. Great Point Lighthouse is 70 feet tall, and it's the only place on Nantucket that's visible from Martha's Vineyard. Granted, it looks like a little tiny white matchstick, but still, that's impressive. The area around Great Point is also an area, and I mentioned it a minute ago, where seals like to congregate because it's the middle of nowhere. They are not bothered by humans. Steve and I are out there taking photos, and we go around one side of the lighthouse, and we look down on the beach, and there's probably 3 dozen seals. Naturally, I took a bunch of photos from a distance, but when I go back and look at them, you can see some of the seals staring over at us, kind of daring us to go over and say hi a little closer. I have dedication to the craft, but I'm not stupid enough to get really close to dozens of seals. I don't think I could fight them all off. And I'm pretty sure Steve wouldn't have rescued me. He'd have remembered me getting all the photos of the snowy owl, and he would have left me there to be destroyed. I make jokes about the dedication to the craft and doing things and going places that put myself in danger, but the reality is it's a lot of calculated risk. There have only been a handful of times in my life as a photographer where I've come out of a situation saying, boy, I shouldn't have done that. So just remember that. Don't be reckless, careful, cautious risk-taking. I hope as I'm going here, I'm trying to give little tips as far as photography goes as I'm telling this story. So I hope some of this stuff actually is useful to you besides laughing. The majority of our trip to Nantucket that day was Great Point Lighthouse. We made it out successfully. We made it back successfully. The rest of that gray day was mainly me going around the downtown area, getting photos of historic homes and historic places that would be in my travel guide. I told Steve that was part of it. That was the catch for him getting to go over there, is that he had to basically be my taxi. When we got done and before we went back to downtown, I thought this was going to be my last trip to Nantucket and the book would be done. There ended up being another trip, which, what a shame I had to go back to Nantucket. I said, we can celebrate the finishing of the book. So we went to Cisco Brewers. They're at 5 Bartlett Farm Road. Just in case if you're over there, if you want to go. Local beer brewery. So I had this vision in my head. Steve and I would saddle up to the bar. We'd each get a beer, kind of cheers, and yay, celebrate a great trip. So that's what I had in my mind. Cisco Brewery is amazing. We went in there. They had plastic cups, which was smart, save the earth. So we each ordered, I think it was an IPA, nice light colored beer. Steve got his, I got mine, and immediately spilled it on the bar. My dreams of this great moment went up in flames. Although I did manage to get a picture of my beer with the menu in the back with what they had on tap. So I have this photo that looks like it's the perfect moment, but in reality, as soon as I picked the beer up, it was spilled on the bar. Yeah, that was good. When it comes to any sort of road trip, photography trip, the ones I've talked about and many countless others, the getting there and getting the photos is easy. It's the when you're done with the trip and you've got to drive home, that's the hard part. I've had many trips where I've been out there taking photos, and suddenly I'm tired and hungry, and I'm like, I don't want to go to these last 10 spots, so I'm just going home. Luckily on Nantucket, it was a lot of, you sit on the ferry as you go back. Steve had to drive, so I had to be chauffeured home. In the end, this trip was all about how far away from civilization we went to get the photos we were looking for. Run-ins with nature that you can't predict, and a lot of getting lucky with who you know. But that is the story of the trip out to Great Point Lighthouse, dedication to the craft. I hope this story time was interesting, and I hope there were a few tidbits that will help you with photography. And there you have it, the end of mixtape number 2, dedication to the craft, all of the photography segments. Did you learn anything? With some of the segments, I would say I hope you learned from my mistakes. Specifically, watch out for coyotes. For those that enjoy the mixtapes, mixtape number 3 will be coming up in a month, going with Christmas week. I figured with holidays like Thanksgiving and Christmas, they would be perfect excuses to put the mixtapes to use. So if you enjoy this format, you're going to get it again in about a month. But next week, we'll be back with an episode that is in canon, episode 222. We're going to celebrate the life and times of heavy metal godfather icon Ozzy Osbourne. We're going to get some useful info, hopefully, and probably a lot of laugh as we look at a Subway restaurant employee training video from the early 1990s. So all of that is coming up next week on episode 222 of the In My Footsteps podcast, the first episode of December, diving headlong into holiday season. Hopefully by then, I and many of you will have worked off our food comas from Thanksgiving. If you enjoy my content, if you enjoy my work, you can support me by becoming a member on Patreon for $5 a month. You can buy me a coffee. That's as little as $1, and it's not even recurring. Or you can do something that's just as important and just as impactful, and that is sharing my work. Sharing the podcast, sharing any of my 10 books, my blog, my YouTube channel. I put in so many hours every week putting together content, marketing, editing, promoting, researching. It is basically another full-time job, but it is something that I love and something that I hope to make more of my life as time goes forward. Now that Thanksgiving has passed and we're getting headlong into the holiday season, you can get some of your shopping done, shop small. There's nothing smaller than a one-person business. Like I said, I've got 10 books available. People that like Cape Cod history, travel, photography, some true crime. You can find them at my website, ChristopherSetterland.com. If not there, you can find them on Amazon. You can find them in local Cape Cod and Massachusetts, Southern New England bookstores. I also have an Etsy shop filled with Cape Cod photography. Give the gift of beautiful Cape Cod scenery and sunsets and more to people that are either from the Cape, used to live on the Cape, or wish they lived on the Cape. Happy Thanksgiving once again. I hope it was, is, or will be the best possible with so much food, friends, family, and fun, and whatever other F's you want to throw in there. Keep it clean. But until next time, remember, in this life, don't walk in anyone else's footsteps. Create your own path and enjoy every moment you can on this journey we call life, because you never know what tomorrow brings. Thank you all for tuning in. This has been the In My Footsteps podcast. I am Christopher Setterland, but you already knew that. And I'll talk to you all again soon.